now called data-infused TV buying. And just in the last few years since the 2012 cycle, where we saw this, especially innovated from Team Obama, is the ways in which TV buying has itself changed radically. The ways in which data is now informing all TV buying in many different ways. At the same time, the underlying technology systems from the media side are now starting to match and map against a lot of those new trends. So we wanted to check back in again at the state of data-infused TV buying, cherry-picking TV, so to speak. And to take the lead on this panel, we have an old friend of this show who's been with us for several shows in a row. Robert Aho is the partner at Prebender Cox. He is a veteran of many GOP campaigns in all of the alphabet soup of, especially on the Republican Party at the RNC, the RNSC. Please welcome back Robert Aho.
Thank you. All right, I am well aware that we are the last panel before lunch, so we promise we'll keep it moving. To start, let's just do some quick introductions down the line. Christina, can we start with you?
Sure. I'm Christina Beaumier. I'm SVP of Media at Xaxis. Xaxis is, to give a little bit about the company, so Xaxis is an audience-based media company. What that means is we basically put the audience first and find that audience across devices, screens, channels, etc.
I'm Alex Lundry. I'm a co-founder and the chief data scientist at Deep Root Analytics. We're a media analytics firm that basically takes a first-party customer file, matches it into set-top box and smart TV data to help optimize TV buys. And I'm also currently serving as the chief analytics officer for the Jeb Bush campaign.
My name's Alexander Taylor. I'm the chief data officer for Cambridge Analytica. So Cambridge Analytica is a data science company which specializes in the measurement of psychological data and then how we can use that data to help our clients inform their messaging campaigns and media analytics.
And I'm Evan Tracy. I'm with the Republican media firm National Media. We do all sorts of races, from the presidential race down to city council, I guess. And I come at this from a long history in sort of the data side, both on the client side, the seller side, and so happy to be here today.
Hello, my name is Farah Bazmanian, and I'm an SVP at TiVo Research. TiVo Research is a company that was formerly known as TRA, acquired by TiVo, the founder and pioneer of the DVR and technology that enables all of us to have this wonderful set-top box data for aggregation and reporting. We actually take set-top box data, aggregate it, and make it available for matching and single source creation across a number of industries, including political.
So what we're saying here is this is basically the nerd panel. Did I understand that right? Farah, but let's stay with you. Let's kind of kick off the conversation. I thought it would be really helpful to just take the view from 40,000 feet. Where the hell are we? I mean, realistically, where are we with data-driven television?
We're in a great space. I've actually been working with television data for audience research measurement for the last 20 years. And in the last 6 has been incredibly exciting because we have the opportunity to get very refined and granular with how we manipulate and can make television an accountable medium. To be able to do the kinds of things we're doing today when it comes to advanced segmentation and targeting, not just in the advertiser and the media space, but in political. And in political, we have a very unique opportunity versus what advertisers and on the commercial side are faced with, in that we're not bound to some of the long-standing obstacles that we have in dealing with not only the acquisition of commercial inventory, but also on the posting, the delivery side, which really is the greatest obstacle in adhering or implementing new measurement techniques in TV, is that we're bound to prove that we delivered that audience. And dollars, major dollars, are put against that, where you are forced then to commit up front to buying this media. But in the political space, we have a very short window and a very narrow end game, where it's make it or break it, and a short time to do so. And where an advertiser has years to accomplish some long-term goals, in the political space, you've got a very narrow period of time, whether it be for caucuses or in the general election. So it's a very exciting time for TV because today we have the metrics we need in order to be more efficient, drive more voters, reach the voters that we want to influence to make the decisions that we need as citizens to represent us. But in order to make it more viral and included more so in this space, we need to also demonstrate its value. Therefore, we need more use cases to be provided on a public scale that validate the application that can then encourage more use. Because let's face it, change is not easy, especially in the television space. That is a very, very traditional means of acquisition.
Anybody up here disagree, or kind of are we all in agreement that we're in a good spot here? Christina?
So I would say we're in a better spot. I think that we have a long way to go, and where I'm coming from, is more on the digital side, sort of pushing into television. What we've seen is the television screen has become so much more dynamic. It's not just sort of linear broadcast TV environment anymore only. You have connected television. Lots of viewers are, watching sort of TV content on the television screen, but they're accessing it via another device. And so that's an interesting environment. You've got addressable television, where you can do one-to-one household level targeting through a linear feed, which is very exciting, and that footprint is growing. It's much bigger than it's ever been before, with 45, 50 million households that are now addressable, which is really, that's starting to those are big numbers. And then you also have what we've seen more, which is the ability to use programmatic platforms to deliver optimized linear plans, which are basically high indexing, and bringing on different data sets. So, and this is all in the last 18 months that a lot of this has started to become much more mature. So it's very exciting, and advanced television or programmatic TV, whatever you want to call it, has become a bit of a loaded term. We just always need to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Or maybe it's not the same thing, at least we know that. But in all of those, there's been advances, and in all of those, more data sets available and more inventory available. So it's a great spot. We just need to use it and get going.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit more. It always fascinates me because, we're in politics, right? So everybody loves to talk about what they're doing when they're not actually doing it. Who is actually, adopting this, or, who are the receptive campaigns or groups that you guys notice? Maybe it's on your side of the aisle or on another side of the aisle that you look at and say, wow, they're actually getting it. They're kind of leading the charge. Who would you point to on that?
Well, I can take a stab at that. I think I'd reference the timeline, right, which is that I think in 2012 you had some experimentation with this at the presidential level. I think the Obama campaign used some set-top box data in Ohio to get some better sense of their buy there. You actually had some experimentation with that on the Romney side that I was a part of as well. It just wasn't as used as aggressively or as much as it was on the Obama side. So you had the inkling of that in 2012. 2013 was kind of a proving ground for this. 2014 especially, when you had basically very expensive TV advertising campaigns and the Senate taking this on, as well as some super PACs that really forced us to do randomized experiments so we could evaluate the lift, the effectiveness. And so 2014 we really came out and said, this stuff actually works. Guess what? Targeting is better than not targeting. Breaking news. And so now we're at a scale where certainly the presidentials, certainly the top tier Senate races, but it is moving further down into congressional. Most of that's a function of having the right audiences available and the data kind of pre-processed in such a way that you can do it cheaply and quickly. So it's emerging there. It's certainly not getting down beyond the congressional. Only really in the most expensive TV races are you seeing that.
Okay, good info. Let's peel back for just a quick second here. As you advise clients or friends in this business, where do you start? What are kind of, how do you talk to them about the role of addressable that plays in a particular, maybe it's a statewide, maybe it's a presidential, maybe it's a smaller race. How do you kind of set the stage and begin to make decisions with a particular client, whether they're at a local level or a national level?
Well, some of this from the planning side comes with the client's specific need and use case, and budget matters. You know, there's kind of a tendency sometimes to ask your big media to do small things, and we try and talk our clients out of that as much as we can, because you still need the big megaphone in the race. Where it comes to things like addressable advertising, you know, in some cases the marketing's outrun the product. You know, where you go in with this, you know, this idea that, hey, I'm going to, you know, get all my left-handed working women, and you start to bring the list to the vendors, and whoops, say we're down to 2 lists, right? Persuadables and turnout, you know. So a lot of it is just trying to level set the expectation of the individual client and make sure that it really fits what they need and can afford. Because again, none of this is free, you know, and I think the media sellers have gotten very good about bringing data to the table. Not that data's been fully commoditized, but there's a lot more of it available back from sellers, and that's obviously helpful when you're explaining to a client, here's what you should do, here's how much it costs. So they have to sort of look through that. You know, again, it's kind of, you know, the term advanced, you know, we shouldn't lose sight of that, right? Just because I have a pair of skis doesn't mean I should go to the Black Diamond Slope. So we got to be mindful of what fits the client, what fits their budget, and what fits their race.
Yeah, and I think when we talk to potential clients, it ultimately boils down to 2 key value propositions, which is efficiency and effectiveness. And quite frankly, usually the more compelling one is efficiency, that this is a way to save money or at least redirect money that into perhaps digital advertising, or maybe push more money back into TV. And we have the evidence to be able to say, look, getting 20%, 30%, sometimes 40% lift in terms of efficiency. But then there's also the effectiveness side, which is that, like I said before, targeted is better than non-targeted. Even in a broadcast medium, you now have the ability to do that targeting, and you can see that there is in fact movement in the polls, in ballot support, in turnout related to targeted television versus traditionally bought television.
So who's getting this better? Is it the super PAC side? Is it the committee side? Is it the candidate campaign committees? Who are you seeing that actually understands and embraces this quicker?
So from our experience, we've found engagement from both sides. At the moment we're working with 2 of the front-running candidates on the Republican side, helping them optimize their TV buys. And both the PACs and the candidate campaigns have been hugely receptive. As Alex said, a big part of that is the immediacy of the feedback that they're able to get. You know, unlike a commercial project where they're really looking at uplift at the shelf, which can take, you know, weeks or months to become evident. With a political campaign, you know, one of the clients we're working with has a call center in their campaign HQ where they're ringing up hundreds of people every day asking them to pledge their support. And when they can see the uplift, in one case study we saw about an 18% uplift between the hours after an optimized TV buy aired versus a non-optimized one, and they can't argue with results like that.
I can just add to that. I think in addition to that, they can see through the same set-top sources whether or not the intended audience was actually exposed to the campaign ad. I mean, that's the side on the measurement that we have to do a better job in getting integrated within the process, that they actually get to see, yes, you did reach segment or voter profile A, and this is how often they were exposed. And then you can track or measure their behavior, whether it be a call-in or to see if there's more traffic in their local or just congressional district at the polls. Those are some ways we can start to actually put validation against it.
Okay, let me throw a curveball here. Talk to me about mistakes. You know, I think oftentimes when there's something new, everybody's always, you know, overly cautious because they're so concerned about making a mistake that was made in a previous cycle or a neighboring state or another campaign. Let's shed some light on this. What are some of the mistakes that have been made or maybe are being made right now with buys going on right now?
Yeah, there's a difference, just to kind of piggyback and bring this together, between technically feasible and should we do it, and can we do it? Have we done it before? We are at the bleeding edge. You just don't want to be the one to bleed. And, you know, what we find obviously in political is there's a moment, and after that moment, it's over, right? There's no make good. There's no sort of tolerance for, oh, it didn't scale. Sorry, you know, you wanted to reach that audience, but we couldn't find them. And that is the very real limitation that we need to be honest about with our clients as we're in the planning phase about, yes, you want to reach this, but you know, we may need to think about broadening it out a little bit more.
Yeah, make good is 2 4-letter words in our business. Anybody else?
Yeah, I got a ton of mistakes people can make all the time. I think the first is in terms of vendors and data providers coming in too late. I mean, I have people coming in, you know, to the JET campaign right now, pitching us products for the Iowa caucuses. I mean, it's in 12 days. You know, that doesn't do us any good. And in fact, it was too late when people were coming in August, right? I mean, budgets are set, but also if you're coming in with something new and unproven, you have to test it. We need evidence that it actually works. We need to do a pilot program. So people come in too late. I think in terms of the actual TV buy, I think thinking that something is programmatic when it's not, right? So understanding what programmatic is exactly, which I'm sure we'll probably talk about. But I think a lot of providers are out there saying they have programmatic solutions when it's really a mechanical Turk. It's a guy behind a computer screen who's then going and executing a buy in a very human way. But then also the other big mistake we see is our optimizations, TV optimizations that are not off of existing inventory or existing costs. I mean, that's everything. You know, if I tell you to go buy a piece of inventory that doesn't exist, or that is priced, differently than what it actually is, that's a failure. And we see that being made by campaigns in working with instances where that happens too frequently.
Yeah, I just would add, I think to that point too, it's some of the times, I think it's Erwin Gottlieb who runs Group M, and I think they place about 1/3 of the world's advertising. He said it right. Media buying is part judgment, part machine. I think maybe there's a little over-reliance on machine part. Again, where sometimes the buyers aren't synced up with the researchers, and you get a bunch of conclusions that you can't implement. So, I think having those two worlds closer together, in our shop, most of our buyers are also researchers, so you can kind of take the output from one side and actually connect it with the realities of buying, to Alex's point, inventory and price. Those things change, they're not set in stone. So I think that's something that is probably a mistake that people are making, is putting too much emphasis on the machine side and forgetting that you actually have to implement this stuff.
But wouldn't it also be a lot of emphasis on planning and not as much on buying as well?
Yeah, sure.
Implementation.
Yeah, again, you can get so caught up, and again, you can invest a lot of money in building a battleship, but if you don't have the money to put the gas in it to get to the battle, it's not really all that worthwhile to your campaign. So it is about sort of finding that balance, and I think being able to bring in these advanced tools, not too late, not too early, but really try and sync those with more of a campaign mindset. Look, at the end of the day, these are going out of business sales, right? And if we don't sell one more bag of dog food than our opponent, we're out of business. So we have to work in that environment. And I think those are some of the realities that people that sell into the corporate world, Coke and Pepsi try something new and it doesn't work, their sales go down for a quarter and they recalibrate. We don't have that in campaigns. So a lot of times our decisions and what we have to advise clients are on do the things that you can implement and actually do to sell that one more bag of dog food.
Right, we're not choosing if we're going to drink Coke or Pepsi for the next 4 or 6 years.
That's right.
I want to go back, Alex, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'll ask a question that is probably on the minds of some in the room. What is the right time? What is the right timing?
Months and months ahead of time. Frankly, I would say new techniques, new data sources, new vendors probably only have about maybe like a month or 2 more window even to be impactful in the presidential general election. Now the problem, of course, with that is that we don't know who the nominee is yet. Obviously, it'll be Jeb. We don't know who the nominee is, and it may be sometime before we know who that nominee is, depending upon how things shake out. But really, there's only a very limited amount of time to do an unproven technology.
Okay, interesting. I want to stay on this for a little bit, these pitfalls or these mistakes.
I got more, man.
I was going to say, I just think it's so enlightening because I know that's such a barrier to entry for a lot of folks in this, in kind of diving in. What other mistakes are you guys seeing?
I would think one is coming in without data studies or data and case studies that are irrelevant to us. If it's a commodity-based business, cell phones or automotive or something, you know, they're a little more relevant than bringing in something that's a concept. I mean, we get concepts all the time that come through our doors that nobody's actually attached to a piece of data or case study that we can then go present to a client. You know, ultimately, you know, it's the client's name that's on the ballot, and if we try something new and lose, you know, we're not the ones that have to live with those consequences, other than the fact that maybe we advise the client. But so a lot of it is we get the, you know, the latest thing that comes through the door, but there's no case study connected to it. There's no use study, you know, so it doesn't translate. And we're not going to take a lot of time to figure this out, because again, we're in these very compressed environments, and you know, we don't have time to be somebody's skunkworks.
Yeah, I mean, that it's kind of my soapbox for today is on the validation and the measurement side, and coming in with use cases that are not just saying, hey, look, here's a targeted plan that's going to be efficient because I'm going to reach more of your intended audience with less money or in less time, and really targeted frequency of exposure. But it's in the aftermath and whether or not I delivered, and can I continue to make it a self-fulfilling cycle that can be leveraged across not just this current campaign, but into the future for other candidates. I think you know, the other mistakes that we make is that we are not doing the diligence in going out and reaching out to let the public know that this kind of information is available. And I'll tell you why, and some of that is because of privacy constraints, especially in this space. The folks at my headquarters are probably like this because, you know, I also work in the healthcare space. I match set-top box data to healthcare claims data. These are very sensitive topic areas, and we have to be very protective of our subscribers. You guys. There was somebody, a TiVo subscriber I met earlier today. We have to protect your identity, and I think we have to be very careful as we start to move forward into this new space and not forget that privacy and PII of everyone's information that we're aggregating and then using to target. So, and even the use of addressable, we have to be careful we don't make those mistakes where PII becomes revealed, because that'll be an enormous mistake we'll never be able to come out of.
Any other mistakes? Pitfalls?
Yeah, I definitely agree that underrating the measurement piece is a common pitfall. You know, it's so valuable to be able to, after the ads have aired, go back and see how many impressions you served on target and come away with a CPM that you can compare to your digital CPMs and use that to make educated decisions about your future media placements. But there's often a lot of emphasis on getting that optimized schedule in the first place, and then not a lot of retrospect afterwards.
Interesting. Okay, let's do a little crystal ball here for a second. I don't want to go too far yet, though. But thinking about the 2016 cycle, where are we going to be? What are we going to be looking at and talking about next December, or this December, January, as what happened in 2016? What was interesting when it comes to programmatic or addressable? What are we going to be fascinated with? What's going to be that shiny object next year?
Just because it hasn't come up yet, and I think it's a shiny object, is really the cross-device. You know, as I think about how people are interacting with content across all screens, those that are able to tap into that well, I think will be the shiny object as we look back, right? So it's not just television, it's television and mobile. You know, we spend so much time. We are watching, we were talking about this earlier, we are watching a lot of television. Like that's not, there's TV's alive and well. But mobile is such an important device, and that second screen experience is so important and so ubiquitous. We can't ignore it, and those who don't, I think, will be the ones we talk about.
Something which is a little bit more left field that we've found that we're actually starting to get really excited about is opportunities for tailoring creative to different slots, which is being enabled by, you know, matching the data to this viewership data. So
talk about how that works.
Yeah, so one of the unique things that we do at Cambridge is that we've taken these psychological inventories that come out of the literature for measuring, you know, the the psychological disposition of any given person, and we've predicted those.
Do you have
psychological
Evan's
scores.
psychological profile? Because we'd like to dive into that here in a little bit.
Oh, no, you wouldn't.
And so we've got these scores for everyone in the country. Now, what we found when we matched that to their viewership data is actually that people's psychology correlates very highly with what they watch. And that seems intuitive, you know, what expresses your personality more than what you watch in your downtime. And so the opportunity to be able to say to our clients, you know, not just these are the slots you ought to be buying in order to serve impressions to caucus goers or swing voters, but to say, and for this particular program, this World War II documentary, which is most heavily watched by a highly neurotic audience, well, this is the sort of creative that you ought to serve into that slot because it's going to resonate with the psychology that people are receiving it.
So it's literally starting at the creative brief level and informing that.
Yeah, this is where we're trying to drive it.
I think after the 2016 campaign, first of all, one thing we'll be doing that we haven't been able to do before is I think we'll be comparing directly campaigns' ability to get an ad on target. We'll be able to evaluate each campaign's advertising in a way that goes far beyond spot counts and GRPs and money spent. We'll be able to say how many swing voters did they actually hit. And we're in the midst of doing that right now. I mean, we can look there's a certain campaign in Iowa which has many more spots than some other advertisers, but they're getting fewer impressions on the GOP primary voter target. Right, so that's a poorly targeted buy.
Does anybody else have that pet peeve that the media seems to be fascinating with the number of spots that run?
Oh yeah, it's terrible. It's the worst possible way to evaluate
Right.
TV advertising. So that's kind of point one. In terms of kind of new, innovative, different things, I mean, one thing we see a lot of promise with that we're experimenting with is trying to evaluate a person's likelihood to have been exposed to a specific ad, and I mean that on an individual attributable level. So right now we can anonymously know whether a box viewed a particular ad, right, which is good, right? But what we can do is through certain data science methods, we can actually say that for John Smith, they have X% likelihood of having seen this specific ad. And when you get into that level of granularity, one, you're not violating PII, right? It's all done in a probabilistic fashion. But when you get to the assertion of that at an individual attributable level, you can actually then start to adjust other forms of direct contact appropriately to people who have been exposed to many, many, many ads. An extreme amount of ads, maybe you can scale down the number of mail contacts you send to that person or the number of times you hit them on the phone, and vice versa for people who haven't been exposed to many ads.
Yeah, I think it's once you get past the Trump-Sanders general election that you'll be talking about things more along the lines of, I think optimization is going to be a big part of this election. I mean, again, I think some of the talk about efficiencies at certainly a presidential level are dangerous. I mean, we saw this, when McCain suspended his campaign and pulled down all his broadcast buys. The Obama campaign just went in and bought up the time that McCain had released. So, I mean, but how you optimize, and again, how you target individuals, and I think also getting cross-device and cross-screen measurements are going to be things that are going to be important. In other words, have, a common CPM to the extent you can is going to be very helpful in sort of guiding a lot of these spend decisions at the end, but it is still about how do you get your 20 pounds of sugar in a 10-pound bag at the end. I don't think that changes.
Because as much as we would love to talk about how the walls are being broken down, there are still walls that exist.
Well, it's a follow the leader business, right? We run the same campaign adjusted for inflation in some cases, but I think you're starting to see it get smarter. It's starting to become easier to do where you get to where you're able to optimize. I mean, again, we've been scaling buys against audiences for 20 years. But I don't need a elaborate survey to tell me, Fox News gets a lot of Republicans, but when I start to move down the food chain of the networks and the channels that are available to me, that's where really this data can help optimize and supplement those choices that you're going to make down the stretch and how you're going to spend your campaign's resources, because resources are not going to be the problem at the presidential level.
I'm curious, let's look a little bit beyond the 16 cycle, because that's so right now. In cycles ahead, what is going to be, in your own opinion, is going to be really disruptive? Where are the game changers? Like, what are your predictions there?
So I would say, I've heard, I think that the TV the traditional TV broadcast model may be in for a slight change in terms of the economics. There are so many ads in the TV, sort of the ad load is so high in television, or it's become so high, that people just prefer to watch, you know, to either fast forward through commercials or watch on another screen. And as a response, I think, you know, in my crystal ball, I think we're going to see programmers reduce their ad loads and actually increase pricing. And so I think that that's going to change the sort of pricing game, at least in the next cycles in 2017, you know, and years beyond. So I feel like that's a fairly disruptive force, certainly for national broadcast and even national cable. We'll see what happens at the local level.
I mean, I just see disruption in just the currency exchange process at the local and on national level when it comes to buying commercial inventory on linear TV. Deals, especially as you have more emerging resources that measure and can demonstrate delivery and determine if there are deficiencies and kickbacks, it could have an impact on pricing. You know, maybe now that we're more refined in targeting, that could drive a premium for certain types of programming for certain audiences over others. So I think we're going to see an impact on rate cards. But I think we're going to see the biggest transition is the acceptance level that's going to be happening across all sides of the table. I've been working with this kind of data for a while, and there's always been one side that's been a bit resistant to it, whether it be the agency's acceptance because they're not being driven by the advertisers or vice versa, or the networks that are just not ready to adopt a new tool, or the local stations that, you know, are just, you know, don't have the staff to support it. Now, because of the demand that's being driven to be more targeted in the publicity, actually, Cambridge got some nice press on something in the press recently on a candidate that I think was really highlighting that this is not going away. This is our current state of affairs and what's going to happen in the future. So crystal ball says we have people accepting this change, and what's going to evolve from that is a different kind of discussion at the table.
Anything else on that?
I mean, presumably, we'll be looking at a more expansive addressable environment for TV. and really, I mean, right now it's just so balkanized where you can do addressability and exactly what that addressability looks like, partial footprint versus full footprint. You know, basically, you know, the difference being, by the way, for those that don't know it, you know, full footprint is where everybody who's viewing that show has to get a version of your ad, but you can customize the version of the ad. Partial footprint is where some people get your ad, other people get a laundry detergent ad. You know, obviously that's the ideal version, but it's a very limited, you know, geographic footprint where you can do that. And frankly, the problem with all this is that most of these more innovative TV, you know, data streams and targeting options and delivery options usually only get rolled out in like the top 50 markets, and those don't match very well with the political map. So that's a problem. But I think as the years go on, we're going to see that addressability kind of get rolled out more and more to borders.
Well, and technology is changing that too very rapidly. You know, with television set, I mean, think if you have a smart TV, the kind of data that's being collected on it. So we're going to find the ability to get really granular at a local level is going to change because the data is going to become rapidly available in the next 2 years in terms of number of homes that we can actually measure at that level.
We're going to hold you to that. I'm curious, for the creatives in the room, myself included, what do you guys wish, you know, you spend so much time looking at the data, what are some of the things that you've whispered under your breath that you wish the content creators or the creatives or the guys putting together the video, what do you wish they were giving you that they're just not?
Well, this doesn't directly answer your question, but it's a variation on it. In that, if I could get all the creatives and really, for that matter, all political strategists to kind of change their thinking in one fell swoop, it would be to think target first, demo second. I don't have a problem with creating an ad that's targeted to women, right? I mean, I think that's exactly what we should be doing. But it needs to be our target women. not just women in general, and better understand exactly who those people are. Instead, they usually go from demo and then target as a secondary consideration. But it's just it's an order of operations issue, really.
That's a fair point. Anything else on that? Come on, you know.
Just that the best targeting in the world can't overcome bad creative.
Yeah, and we've seen our share of it this cycle, right?
I mean, coming from a data science point of view, it really is just about listening to the data from our perspective. So I don't want to say be less creative, but more guided by listening to the audience.
You mean you?
I do.
Sorry, I couldn't resist. Okay, let me switch around a little bit, and then I think we'll get to some questions here in a little bit. Your clients, for those of you that serve in a consulting capacity, what do you wish they were asking for, or what do you wish they were more interested in at this point? I mean, understanding that this is still very much a long educational process with everybody, and it's constantly evolving, and you constantly have to keep people up to speed on it. But the clients that you're working with, just kind of blindly following where you want to lead them, or are they asking smart questions, or have they just turned it over and said, please figure this out? This is beyond my pay grade, figure this out for me. I didn't tell you it was going to be easy questions.
I think here's the thing: is we're now at a point. Frankly, I'm in a very comfortable place now, in that we're now at a place on the Republican side in campaigns where it is assumed that you will have an analytics role, whether or not that's in-house or external. It's just assumed that you will have an analytics role, that you will have people crunching massive volumes of data and providing strategic and tactical advice, and that's fantastic because frankly we were not there 4 years ago. And so in terms of the culture, I'm really satisfied with the questions that campaign managers are asking, that candidates are asking, that top-tier strategists are asking. They're assuming that we should have a seat at the table in most cases, which is a fantastic starting point. Now we're in that moment of adoption where they know that they need this, but they don't know exactly what they need. And they don't know exactly how to ask the right questions. And so it's a learning process in both respects because frankly, on the analytics side, all of a sudden, we've kind of entered into the campaign and we're trying to figure out exactly how we fit. I mean, I don't even know that there is an ideal way to structure an analytics group inside of a campaign because it's really the first time that this is happening in so many instances. So we're in that kind of adoption period where we're all trying to figure it out.
I mean, I agree. I mean, we're the subject matter experts, right? So we should always be smarter than our clients on the topic area if we're being hired to support them in the space. So questions are certainly always welcome, but I think in this particular space it's also pretty tough because it's a bit fleeting, right? One day the numbers could be up and there could be strong backing and support and investment, and the next day they could be down 20 points and there's no money. So this is very different than when we manage our advertiser clients and so forth, where we have, they're like, what's happening next year? How are we going to prove that this works so that next year we do even better or we're smarter? In this space, it's how are we going to really maximize the moment? So it's a bit of a different space than, on the other side, but I think they're asking, I think the adoption process, the demonstration of adoption and interest is a huge step in the right direction, especially given this is a baseline year. As Alex was saying, that we're going to look back and say, we have some baseline to measure against, and then the real questions are going to start really coming in.
Last thing I just kind of want to explore just briefly is the scalability discussion, and we've talked a little bit about this, but obviously it's a different discussion when you're talking to a presidential versus a statewide versus a congressional versus something even smaller. So what advice or what thoughts would you have? Let's kind of throw the presidential stuff off the table for just a second. What advice would you give that's different in terms of must-haves or first steps or, dipping your toe into the water for a statewide versus a congressional? Or a $5 or $10 million media budget or a $1 or $2 million media budget? Maybe that's the way to look at it.
Well, I think in terms of whether or not to do advanced TV, it's a math problem, right? It really is. It's you take how much are you going to spend on TV? What's your anticipated lift out of using advanced TV? How much will using advanced TV cost you? You do the math, you figure out if one number is bigger than the other, and that should be how you decide whether or not to do it. It's not that simple, but it should be that.
And most people don't want to just do the simple math, do they?
They don't want to do it, or they don't believe it. I mean, because it is still new, right? It is still new, and just, we can go in there with case studies and demonstrations of effectiveness. It's still difficult for them to understand, the basics and the power of the lift that you can get out of this targeting.
We have something at Zaxis that we've just gone out and done a bunch of trainings internally for our operations team called the triangles of danger. And basically, there are two triangles inversely inversely matched. And basically, the story is, if you want really, really, really tight targeting, you need more budget, right? And if you want, and so it's very hard / it's not setting yourself up for success to do extraordinarily tight targeting, congressional, let's say, low budget, targeted to specific psychographic profiles or voter profiles. That's not going to set you up for success. So you sort of need to make choices about how much can you have, how big is your mix, what's most important, and and then it becomes really the math question. I'd say for those really, really tight ones, maybe you want to take don't want to do sort of the more targeted stuff. Maybe you leave that for the bigger races. You can do a lot more if you're talking at a national level. So, yeah,
okay.
Whitelist the triangles of danger.
Before we get to questions from the audience, any other thoughts on that? Difference between kind of mid-level and large budgets?
Yeah, no, I think budget should drive decision-making for a campaign. Again, I think the risk is investing and then not having the resources to then actually put it to practice. And again, I think every campaign is different. Media markets are different. The number of voters you have to influence are different. And I think all of that should be in the calculus. And again, the cost has to be juxtaposed. Again, unless you're the Obama campaign, you have $1 billion to do all this stuff. Something's got to give, whether that's phones or mail or radio or whatever it is. You have to look at it across all the things you're trying to do as a campaign and determine, does this deliver the bang for the buck? Is there ROI here for my campaign and my particular need? If it's a really close race, 10,000 voters are going to decide it, probably a good investment. If you're 20 points out, in a challenger with no name ID, probably want to spend that money introducing your candidate to voters. So, every campaign really has sort of a different set of circumstances, and those things have to be weighed. And again, everything sort of begins and ends with the budget conversation.
Well, and for that matter, I'd also tell these guys that there is such a thing as standard targeting, as off-the-shelf targeting versus custom targeting. I know it sounds like jumbo shrimp, but there's standard targeting, right? And so those things are available to these people at a lower price point, where using a generic swing voter model is not as good as using your swing voter model, but it's a hell of a lot better than using Adults Plus. Right.
Really is that simple. You guys are my new favorites. That was fun. Steve, I think, do we have time for questions from the audience?
Hi, Monica Seabaum with Tremor Video. Do any of you have a real-world example where a political campaign or advocacy campaign used addressable TV successfully?
Yeah, we've used it in the past couple of cycles, and again, I think you sort of define successful. Again, we didn't use it in replace of our media. We used it in support of, and a couple of instances where we were in, very tight congressional races, and we could over-deliver to households that had, swing Republicans or turnout Republicans. That helps on the margins. Again, it was never in replace of, but it was a supplement to. And I think, the other thing it showed is it validated a lot of our other research. We spend a lot of time, effort, and money doing research to find the right target audience and the right mix. And when you're able to use an addressable product, which isn't necessarily going to the 8 cable networks you're buying, but it's going to the household, We did see lift in those households, but again, it was on top of a lot of media tonnage. I'm not going to sit here and say this is how the race was won. I don't think I could go there, but I could certainly say it definitely helped at the margins, and it definitely put more lead on target with two very important voter groups that we knew we needed. So, in some cases you're over-delivering, but that's a good thing when you're talking about turnout Republicans, that if they don't show up on election day, you're out of business. And again, in swing households, again, these are things that are very helpful. But again, the limitations are that I couldn't bring 7 lists, to get to scale. So I really ended up doing a targeted product with 2 very, distinct groups.
We did it's not addressable specifically, but targeted TV. We did a randomized controlled experiment in Texas for Governor Abbott during his primary. We worked with Dr. Darren Shaw from UT Austin there, and we basically randomized every single type of communication you could send to a campaign. TV, radio, phones, mail, door knocks, digital, everything, across media markets and cable zones. And we weren't just able to evaluate the effectiveness of TV versus all those other things. We also randomly assigned media markets to receive targeted TV versus traditionally Nielsen 35 plus bought TV. And in the end, based on a pre and post survey evaluation coupled with actual turnout rolls, so we could see whether or not those people voted, we saw lift in terms of ballot impact of targeted TV at 12 percentage points. The next closest was traditional TV at 5 percentage points. Radio was at 4, and digital and phones and door knocks were lower than that. So targeted TV demonstrably works better than non-targeted TV, and TV still continues to be the easiest, fastest way to get a lot of impressions on your target.
Joe Mandisi from Media Post. So you guys did a great job explaining the who and the when. But one of the problems with programmatic TV or addressable is the what, the creative. Getting the right message to the right user at the right time. Even if you have the footprint and the data, can be a problem. How are you guys just generally cracking that, and how much of an impediment is it to you executing the buys?
Yeah, so having being able to match enough households to do a large-scale addressable TV campaign is definitely a challenge at the moment. But that footprint is growing all the time as the platforms over which people consume media are changing. There's more streaming. The ability to target individual devices is only going to get larger.
How are you addressing the creative?
So, in terms of an individually targeted messaging campaign, how do we inform the creative? Yeah. Well, so from our side, it all begins with the data. So we will generate an audience from these offline data that we hold. These enormous databases that contain thousands of data points about every individual in the country. And from those audiences that we've identified from within those data sets, we put together a creative brief, which then we hand over to our clients to guide them in building the creative, and then we work with them to roll out a targeted messaging campaign. And that might be digitally, it might be addressable to whatever extent is possible.
I mean, at the end of the day, there is still a role for traditional survey work, focus groups, phone survey. That kind of, obviously you've got the market research, you've got the demographics, you've got the audience, right? But you've also got the product, you got the candidate or the issue, whatever you're selling, and then the timing of it. I mean, that all needs to get baked into the creative brief, and then that ultimately decides the creative.
And I was just going to say,